Resistance to the philosophy of animal rights takes many forms, from the incredulous, "You can't be serious," to the superficial, "What about carrots?" and from the prideful, as in the increasingly heard boast, "I'm a speciesist and proud of it," to the deep. While most objections are to serious thinking what veneer is to seasoned wood, some, I have in mind objections that some feminists bring against the idea of animal rights in particular and the notion of individual rights in general, some deserve a serious hearing and exploration. I listened to and explore the feminist challenge in a recently published book, and will spare you an airing of my views on this matter on this occasion. Here I sketch only a few of the more substantive philosophical objections and my replies. Quite possibly the most important objection raised against the position I accept involves variations on a main theme, namely the alleged inapplicability of the idea of moral rights to non-human animals. Of course, if there are no moral rights, if not even human animals have them, then my position would seem to lack so much as a handhold. If moral rights is an empty idea, animal rights can hardly fill it. But is this idea empty? I think most of us will find it difficult to answer in the affirmative. Things we think and feel very deeply concerning, for example, our thoughts and feelings about racial, sexual, religious, and other forms of prejudicial discrimination verily cry out for the language of rights, just as our convictions and attitudes about the removal of such barriers would have at most a diminished voice if we were to purge the concept of rights from our moral vocabulary. This is no proof that humans have moral rights. My remarks here are intended only to remind us that, independent of any partisan maneuvering on behalf of some favored theory of moral rights, there is the widely shared conviction that moral rights are something, not nothing. But is it possible, even assuming that human beings have rights, that non-human animals have moral rights? Our answer to this question depends in obvious ways on what we think the possession of moral rights presupposes. In a lead article in the New England Journal of Medicine, entitled "The Case for the Use of Animals in Biomedical Science," Carl Cohen argues that rights can belong only to human beings because, and I quote, "rights arise and can be intelligibly defended only among beings who actually do or can make moral claims against one another." But surely how rights arise leaves open the question of which individuals have them. By way of analogy, as far as we know, theories of genetics arise only among humans, and only humans make scientific claims about genes. Does it follow that only humans have genes? It would be a dubious logic that permitted this inference to a new biology. Cohen's logic is no less dubious in authorizing his inference to an old morality. Many people who deny that non-human animals have moral rights do so because they think rights presupposes reciprocity. In order for it to be true that A has a duty to respect B's rights, it must be true that B has a duty to respect A's rights. Thus, I have a duty to respect your rights, you have a duty to respect mine. That is, we reciprocate. When it comes to rodents and hamsters, primates and dogs, however, the situation is importantly different, because they cannot meaningfully be said to have a duty to respect our rights. We do not have a duty to respect theirs either. That is, reciprocity is missing. Though much abler minds than mine have endorsed this view, sometimes with evident conviction and enthusiasm, I remain unconvinced. The grounds of my skepticism will be familiar. Myself, I simply do not understand why it is impossible that I have a duty to respect the rights of young children, for example, despite the fact that they cannot reciprocate. I mean, some child about 3 months old. Thus, I do not understand how we can deny that non-human animals have rights on the grounds that they cannot reciprocate. To exclude them, that is, these animals, for this reason, while including children who can't reciprocate, is arbitrary in the extreme. Common response at this juncture takes the following form. Assuming all goes well, children someday will become mature adults with a variety of favored capacities, among which rationality and autonomy are by far the most frequently favored. Thus, although they lack these capacities while they are young, these children do not lack the potential for acquiring them. And it is for this reason, that is, that they have the potential for acquiring these favored capacities, that we can ground the conviction that they have rights. Not so in the case of non-human animals. they lack the potential for rationality and autonomy, to mention these favored capacities. Thus, because their moral position is relevantly different from that of young children, it is not arbitrary to believe that children, but not non-human animals, have moral rights. This argument is less obviously flawed than the previous ones, but it is flawed. For openers, why think rationality and autonomy are the decisive characteristics that determine who does and who does not have rights? Why not the capacity to experience pleasure and pain? That's what Bentham had said. Or to enter into caring relationships, what some feminists would argue. Or to have an experiential welfare, something close to my view. If these characteristics are chosen, then many, many non-human animals will qualify. Those feminists I mentioned earlier, the ones who are highly suspicious of the concept of individual rights, also are highly suspicious of the supposed value neutrality involved in selecting rationality and autonomy as the decisive characteristics in the sense explained. And while I cannot either fully explain or assess their misgivings on this occasion, it is important to realize that such misgivings exist and cannot be fairly ignored. Moreover, even if we grant that rationality and autonomy are the decisive characteristics in the sense explained, appeals to the potential of acquiring them are fraught with very serious problems. I mention only two. First, if it is a newborn child's potential for autonomy and rationality that grounds the possession of rights, then one will be hard-pressed indeed to explain why the same is not equally true of a normal human fetus from the moment of conception onward, and hard-pressed, too, to explain why abortions performed even in the early weeks of pregnancy do not violate the right to life of the fetus. That is to say, why such abortions are not murder. And yet many, many people who choose rationality and autonomy as the decisive characteristics and who appeal to the absence of any potential to acquire these capacities as a basis for excluding non-human animals as possible bearers of rights seem loath to adopt a strong anti-abortion position. My modest point is it's hard to see how all these beliefs can be consistently entertained. Second, not all human children have the potential for becoming rational and autonomous. Sadly, some suffer from profound mental handicaps. Do these children therefore lack moral rights? Myself, I find this a most uncongenial idea. Myself, I do not think that someone who sexually abuses or tortures one of these children has merely failed to be kind or decent, or that what is done is wrong because others find it offensive. Myself, I think these children have been treated unjustly. The treatment they have received was not their due, just the opposite. But now, if this much is granted, then the selection of rationality and autonomy as the decisive characteristics must be called into question. For if these children can have their rights violated and not be rational and autonomous, not even potentially rational and autonomous, then the actual or potential possession of these capacities is not necessary for the possession of rights. Let it be granted, then, that all non-human animals lack these capacities. I note in passing that this admission itself is highly questionable. It does not follow that these animals do not have rights. Cohen has a reply to this argument. In his view, there is a morally relevant difference between 1. Human children who lack the potential for autonomy and rationality, and 2. Non-human animals who lack this potential. In the case of these children, lack of this potential is a defect. That is, they are missing potentials that are normal to their kind. Not so in the case of the other animals. Because having this potential is not normal to their kind, its absence in their case is not a defect. Now, the conceptual point being made here seems to me to be correct. For example, we humans do not have the potential to swim underwater without the assistance of mechanical aids for hours at a time. But we are not defective, do not suffer from a defect for this reason. A shark who lacks this potential, however, is a defective shark. So the question is, granting that the concept of a defect has the logic it does, what follows morally from noting that non-human animals who lack the potential for rationality and autonomy are not defective, whereas human children who lack this potential are defective? Will it be suggested that those for whom this is a defect possess moral rights, but not those for whom this is not a defect? This is Cohen's position, and it too is flawed. It is an odd logic that requires that those individuals for whom the lack of the potential to acquire a given capacity is a defect are to be classified and treated as if they had this potential anyway. Many children suffer from many different kinds of defects, both physical and mental. Some will never walk, others will never see or hear, still others will never be able to speak or read or add and subtract. In these tragic cases, these children lack the potential to acquire these capacities, notwithstanding that normal human beings possess them. Should we treat these defective humans as if they had these potentials anyway? Do we violate their rights if we fail to teach them calculus or the finer points of the Midsummer Night's Dream? I do not want to be misunderstood or misquoted. In raising these questions, I do not in the least want to suggest that children who suffer from various handicaps should not be treated well. Just the opposite. The philosophy I have developed at length and in some detail attempts to illuminate why they are due such treatment as a matter of strict justice, why they are due respect for the beings they are. My point in raising the questions I do is to help remind us of a simple but, in my view, an important truth. When rights are tied to capacities or the potential to acquire them, they must depend on the actual capacities or potentials of individuals themselves considered individually. And this is important. For if I'm right about this, then another line of argument that has been used to deny moral rights to non-human animals, that's Cohen's argument, for example, can succeed only at the price of excluding many human beings as well. One cannot reasonably include these humans and exclude these animals by appealing to what is or is not a defect.